for over 40 years. Today we're going to look at the architectural details in the oldest and newest subway stations in New York. First up, let's talk about one of the oldest subway stations, City Hall. When the subway opened in 1904, the City Hall station was one of the first of the 28 stations. It was the showpiece of the entire system. They created these grand vaults, almost like a cathedral, with these beautiful Romanesque arches that follow along the curve of the station. So each one of these vaults is made out of Guastavino tile, which is actually a terracotta tile that is structural, and it's a system of layers, and they're usually put in a herringbone pattern, and they alternated the colors. And Guastavino tile is actually used in many places throughout New York City. One example is the Oyster Bar in Grand Central Station. Another example is the underside of the Queensboro Bridge at 59th Street. And the City Hall stop was so unique as the showpiece that not only did it have skylights, but it also had these beautiful brass chandeliers to give light underneath in a very decorated manner. So the City Hall station was closed down in 1945 because of this tight curve. The new, longer trains couldn't make the turn. All the IRT subway stations were designed by Hines and Lafarge, and obviously here at City Hall, they created quite a masterpiece. But the typical station is much less ornate and is really stripped down and is much more about function and operation than it is about beauty and ornament. Okay, let's talk about a typical IRT subway station. So this image shows a 14th Street Express station when it first opened, and that's why it's so clean. What made New York City's subway system unique from other cities was that when they first built it, they included express tracks as well. No other city had that. And you could see the express track running beyond on the other side of these columns right here, where the local pulls into the station. Typically, you'd go down less than 18 feet to get to the platform, and then the tracks would be about 3 feet below that. Because they're so close to the surface, and the way that they get fresh air from the sidewalk above is you could actually hear the subway coming when you're walking along the sidewalk above. And the thing about these IRT stations is that they're extremely simple, and they're all about just getting it done and getting it done quickly. So the way they built these stations was by a method called cut and cover. They cut a trench in the middle of the street, less than 20 feet deep. So this is basically a cross-section through the subway tunnel. The train would ride in here on its wheels. This would be the express track going in the opposite direction, and this again would be the local track here with another train. And then above, they would put in these columns, they would build the walls, they would lay down the track, and then above this tunnel, they would put in all the utilities, so the sewer lines and the water lines, the electrical lines that the city needs to run, and then on top of that, they would put the road. So here's where the building is, that's where a building is, here's the sidewalk, and then here's the road. So let's take a look at the 96th Street station along the 2nd Avenue line. And what distinguishes this station from one of the typical IRT stations that we just looked at is that there's no columns in it. Because it's tunneled, it's sort of self-supporting, and it forms this one continuous vault. This was the city's first major subway expansion in over 50 years. It extended the Q line along 2nd Avenue to 4 different stations, 63rd Street, 72nd Street, 86th Street, and 96th Street. So this is how they dug out the 2nd Avenue tunnel. So if the street is here, and these are the buildings, what they did is they went really deep, and they tunneled all the way down here with giant drills and giant drill bits, which they actually leave at the end of the tunnel. They don't take it out, so it's still down there. And when they extend the 2nd Avenue subway up to 125th Street, they'll keep that same drill bit, and it will stay then at the northern end of 125th Street. What distinguishes the 2nd Avenue subway from the other stations is that the platform is in the middle, and the tracks are at the edge, and then there's a mezzanine where people walk up here and up here, and it's open to the curved ceiling of what was the tunnel. So a person standing here can look down to the platform there, and then the stairs come down here, and here's the subway. And you get this double height space, which is very nice. So one thing that distinguishes the New York City subway is it's super loud, because it doesn't run on rubber wheels like a lot of other cities' subway lines do. And 2nd Avenue, they made a determined effort to make it a lot quieter, and they included these acoustic panels, which would absorb a lot of those sounds. So the 2nd Avenue subway is much more humanistic. It's much brighter, it's much more open, it's not as dark, it's not as dingy as a lot of the other original subway stations are. So let's step back for a second and talk about the history of these subways. What prompted the subway to begin with was the great blizzard of 1888, believe it or not. At that time, New York had trolleys, and it even had elevated trains that were started in the 1870s. But this blizzard paralyzed all of that travel. And not only that, but New York City also, electricity was relatively new. And all the wires were above ground and were put up in a very haphazard way. And they formed this almost solid web so that when all the snow came down, it took down all the wires with them. So what people don't always realize is that putting all the electrical power below ground happened at the same time as putting the subways underground. Okay, so let's take a look at the iconic New York City subway map. So what jumps out at me about this early IRT map is that in red, it shows the actual subway lines, of which there are not many, but they do go to Brooklyn and they do go to Queens. And these blue lines are actually the elevated subways that still remained. And so earlier we were talking about City Hall, and you could see that station right here, very close to the Brooklyn Bridge station, which is why in 1945, when they closed the City Hall station, it did not inconvenience many riders because Brooklyn Bridge Station was so close. So let's take a look at the full map. So the MTA is a combination of three subway companies, the IRT, the BMT, and the IND. And that's why